So here we go again with the Oscars The Best Picture commentary by me, Simon Kennedy. We left off last week with Midnight Cowboy. Midnight Cowboy is an extremely controversial film for many reasons, especially at the time. It basically broke a lot of the codes of the motion picture production code, which was the Hays Code as it was known. There was a list of things you couldn't do. For instance, you couldn't mock authority, you couldn't show nudity, you couldn't discuss frankly sex, etc. And this time, with a new introduction by the MPAA of the rules or the ratings, this became the first Best Picture winner and the only Best Picture winner to win as an X-rated Best Picture winner. That X has now moved on or migrated into porn, but it's interesting how this was shocking, absolutely shocking. But I think sometimes it's because the truth can be shocking, and it really was. It's a fantastic film. I recommend it highly. Crash. Oh dear. Crash is a painful film, very painful. There is this thing about it being patronising, and this is Paul Haggis's passion piece. The real problem, I think, with Crash is it tries to be a kind of very satirical and a very analytical film about the ways and means of racism within somewhere like LA, for instance, but particularly within the layers of society and layers of culture within society. I mean by that class, actually. It's so patronising. It's kind of, you can't relate to people without them being in a particular position, in this case a moral quandary, and having to make a moral decision. And then of course it's every single race is represented, but every single race is represented in such a way that they're not empathetic. They're just sort of caricatures of an emotional being, an emotional state, and there's these really horrible sequences where it becomes so overtly aggressively trying to manipulate you emotionally. I love this reverse. I love the fact that, because I really wanted to highlight the fact that if you take this film back, if you go back, it becomes this odd sense of, you can see it coming from the start. So when you get to the end of a sequence, you could pretty much, if you were shown that, you could guess, if you wanted to go on classic ways that a film worked, you'd be able to work it all the way back and classically say, this will be in there, this will be in there, this will be in there. It's classical filmmaking, but in a really bad, terrible way that's so awful that it's painful to watch. But it does have some moments where it's quite funny, though, to be fair, so I must give it that. It does have some very good comedy, especially very black satirical comedy, but it's an absolutely terrible film against Brokeback Mountain. Simran, personal favourite of mine. I always stick up for a lot of films which are, let's say, from the classic era. I know this was very controversial because it spent so much money. I mean, it spent a massive amount of money and lost a lot of money, and it was only on its second release, I think it's 35 release, when it was released again in 1935, did it reclaim some of its money back. It actually broke even, but before that it was a flop. But the critics loved it. They don't love it now, but they loved it then. All of these guys raved about it, and rightly so. I personally think it's a brilliant film, and I think that there's a lot to, yes, it was costly, yes, also it's slightly paternal, and it has a real issue with race, but I think that we have to, I disagree with Pauline Kael in the sense that it's a numbskull film. It's a heartfelt film, but it's also an agenda film. It's challenging female roles, it's challenging black roles, it's challenging male roles, and it's showing the effects of industrialization on America, and especially the America of that point in time when America was becoming a superpower, was growing into its superpower shoes, because this is really about the crossing over of the American dream, the America of the 1890s, into the American dream, into the American post-First World War America, where the colonial powers were becoming far less influential, and freedom, and certainly the idea of democracy was growing, and America was seen as a bastion of hope. A lot of people looking, especially from the colonized countries, as America as the example of how they could progress, how they could change their destinies, because they were under British colonial rule, and because they wanted to signify that we can be more than the sum of the parts that we are at the moment, or our historical parts. And I think it's quite progressive, and that's something that's completely missed from this film, because it does have an agenda. It's very much a swaggering agenda, and if you watch the film and you look, you will find it. It's I feel is overtly there. It's really overtly there, as are the fact that Richard Dix, who is a fantastic actor, I mean he's a classic actor, so he's a bit over the top regularly, but he is again investing in this, a character of a man who is challenging or challenged the perception of what he has to do, what he has to be, and it's that good. I mean, if you look at also the female roles in this, they are centered on women coming to power and taking over from men who have kind of abandoned the world, because the men have become, let's be perfectly honest, fragmented by what's happened, by the effects of their role being negated or their role being almost reduced in a sense. And I just absolutely adore it as a film. I think it's absolutely brilliant and needs to be taken and certainly given more respect. Forrest Gump. Forrest is Forrest always splits an audience, rightly or wrongly. I often think it's because people attribute the book, the Winston Groom book, to this. I know it's about to introduce me to get this out, so here we go. Winston Groom's book is very much a right-wing, sort of right-wing endorsement of all the things that America should stand for and American history. What I think people miss, though, is the fact that Forrest Gump is not that book. It is actually a satire. It's a satire of how America sees itself, how actually America is totally opposite to that, and how people have become almost, in this time 94, thanks, I'm not, thank you, but yeah. And these are the reasons why. I mean, it basically, it has that real streak of satire. Like Pulp Fiction, another film people do not get as actually a satire. It's a satirical film. They miss that. Look at that. That is a zinger at the American military. It captures America through the eyes of old America. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to see the classic Capra-esque America, but satirically introduce that in a way that will make us understand and laugh at that. And to label that as simple naive is so ridiculous. I mean, take this picture. Okay, so my argument is, this picture, when you look at this picture, I know exactly where that picture was taken. I know what it is. Some people look at that and say, that's a terrible picture. It was taken by mistake, but I think it's beautiful. I think it captures a lot of things, but I also think it's funny as well, because if you look like this, you can suddenly see how surreal this world is. And that's what Forrest Gump is. Forrest Gump is looking at things slightly differently and really having a poke of fun at it. I hate the King's Speech. Absolutely hate it. It's all that is wrong with British filmmaking. I know we have to rely on heritage, we have to rely on the royalty, but it's just an awful, painful piece of cinema. It literally, it obsesses over how, you know, we have to, royals are people too, and this. And I know that the argument, and at least I hear it regularly, is the specific reason why that's like that is because of how film stars or superstars from America, especially the people voting, remember the people voting for these films, their lives, they feel that this is how people, or how their lives are lived, like royalty, and so they feel that all of the things that they suffer from, which we don't see, are never acknowledged, and they're never given kudos for the suffering that they go through and the fact that people think they live perfect lives, etc., etc. But I think the problem I find with this film is that it really negates anything to do with normal people living normal lives. Instead it says only those people who are affluent, only those people who are well off have access to all the best doctors, all the best that life can provide them. They're the ones who really suffer because they don't have the chance to really live a normal life, do they? And I just think it's absolutely facetious. I mean, you just look at the way it treats its main characters, but specifically the way it treats us, the audience. It almost looks down at us. It's saying that we're better than you. We're suffering, so our suffering matters, and we're better than you because we suffer with stoicism. I mean, I find it an absolute pig's ear of a film. I don't like it, and I appreciate that, you know, its director suffered at the hands of people because they dismissed him first because he was directed casualty, which I think is totally wrong. I think, you know, that's really naive. That's, in fact, I would actually go as far as it's slightly offensive as well, because any filmmaker will tell you that it's hard to make a film, and specifically him and Tom deserves to be given credit for that. But I'm sorry, for me, outside of that, the film itself is just an absolute pig's ear, and I hate it because it's all about class, but it's all about the upper class and how much better they are than us. Right, stats time. Well, acting as a role, being a role in cinema is beneficial, especially if you want to win awards. I mean, Charles Lawton was the first to win an award for playing Henry VIII in The Private Lives of Henry VIII. Then 13 people have been nominated since then for playing roles. They're historical characters, real historical characters. And there's 17 times for those roles. Twice, Kate, what's her name? But anyway, so winners, Helen Mirren's won, Judi Dench has won. You've got Katharine Hepburn, Colin Firth has won as well. Remember, Katharine Hepburn drew with Barbara Streisand. But, I mean, the success rate is fantastic. 34% success is really good. I'm thinking of Elizabeth and Kate Blanchett, by the way. So it's better than playing any other historical character, to be honest with you, whose success rate is somewhere in the region of like 12-15%.